Studies Section 7. Increasing Returns. Introduction. Our example of a monopolistically competitive industry says little about the pattern of trade that results from economies of scale. The model assumes that the cost of production is the same in both countries and that trade is costless. These assumptions mean that although we know that the integrated market will support 10 firms, we cannot say where they will be located. For example, 4 firms might be in home and 6 in foreign, but it is equally possible, as far as this example goes, that all 10 will be in foreign or in home. To say more than that, the market will support 10 firms. It is necessary to go behind the partial equilibrium framework that we have considered so far and think about how economies of scale interact with comparative advantage to determine the pattern of international trade. Let us therefore now imagine a world economy consisting as usual of our 2 countries, home and foreign. Each of these countries has 2 factors of production, capital and labor. We assume that home has a higher overall capital-labor ratio than foreign, that is, that home is the capital-abundant country. Let's also imagine that there are 2 industries, manufacturers and food, with manufacturers the more capital-intensive industries. The difference between this model and the factor proportions model in previous chapters is that we now suppose that manufacturers is not a perfectly competitive industry producing a homogeneous product. Instead, it is a monopolistically competitive industry in which a number of firms all produce differentiated products. Because of economies of scale, neither country is able to produce the full range of manufactured products by itself. Thus, although both countries may produce some manufactures, they will be producing different things. The monopolistically competitive nature of the manufacturers industry makes an important difference to the trade pattern, a difference that can best be seen by looking at what would happen if manufacturers were not a monopolistically competitive sector. If manufacturers were not a differentiated product sector, we know from chapter 4 what the trade pattern will look like. Because home is capital abundant and manufacturers capital intensive, home would have a large relative supply of manufacturers and would would therefore export manufacturers and import food. Schematically, we can represent this trade pattern with a diagram like figure 6.6. The length of the arrows indicates the value of trade in each in each direction. The figure shows that home would export manufacturers equal in value to the food it imports. If you assume that manufacturers is a monopolistically competitive sector, each firm's products are differentiated from other firms, home will still be a net exporter of manufacturers and an importer of food. Analysis. However, foreign firms in the manufacturer sector will produce products different from those that home firms produce, because some home consumers will prefer foreign varieties, home although running a trade surplus in manufacturers will import as well as export within the manufacturing industry. With manufacturers monopolistically competitive, then the pattern of trade will look like figure 6.7. We can think of world trade in a monopolistic competition model as consisting of 2 parts. There will be two-way trade within the manufacturing sector. This exchange of manufacturers for manufacturers is called industry trade. The remainder of trade is an exchange of manufacturers for food called inter-industry trade. If manufacture is a monopolistically competitive industry, home and foreign will produce differentiated products. As a result, even if home is a net exporter of manufactured goods, it will import as well as export manufacturers, giving rise to industry trade. Take 2. Giving rise to inter-industry trade. Notice these 4 points about this pattern of trade. 1. Inter-industry manufactures for food trade reflects comparative advantage. The pattern of inter-industry trade is that home, the capital-abundant country, is a net exporter of capital-intensive manufactures and a net importer of labor-intensive food. So, comparative advantage continues to be a major part of the trade story. 2. Intra-industry trade, manufactures for manufacturers, does not reflect comparative advantage even if the countries had the same overall capital-labor ratio. Their firms will continue to produce differentiated products, and the demand of consumers for products made abroad will continue to generate inter-industry trade. These economies of scale that keep each country from producing the full range of products for itself. Thus, economies of scale can be an independent source of international trade. 3. The pattern of intra-industry trade itself is unpredictable. We have not said anything about which country produces which goods within the manufacturers sector because there is nothing in the model to tell us. All we know is that the countries will produce different products. Since history and accident determine the details of the trade pattern, an unpredictable correspondent, take 2, an unpredictable component of the trade pattern is an inevitable feature of a world where economies of scale are important. Notice, however, that the unpredictability is not total. 4. The relative importance of intra-industry and inter-industry trade depends on how similar countries are. If home and foreign are similar in their capital-labor ratios, then there will be little inter-industry trade and intra-industry trade, based ultimately on economies of scale, will be dominant. On the other hand, if the capital-labor ratios are very different so that, for example, foreign specializes completely in food production, there will be no intra-industry trade based on economies of scale. All trade will be based on comparative advantage. This is the end of study section 7. Thanks for listening.